Love, Hate, and Propaganda, The Cold War, a 4-part series with George Stroumboulopoulos. The global fight for your mind.
We've all heard the saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. But do you believe it's true that words can actually be more powerful than bombs? Well, in the 1980s, they are. 3 men, 3 new voices speak out and change the rules of the Cold War. An American president, an actor. His lines will resonate around the world. A Polish pope. His preaching will rattle the Iron Curtain. And a Soviet leader, bit of an idealist. His call for change will unleash dramatic events that will shake communism to its foundation. 3 men are about to change the destiny of the world in a time of love, hate, and propaganda. (1982), Manchester, Maine, a small town in the northeastern United States. Like every small town everywhere, big world problems seem far away. But there is something in the air: fear. That fear scares 10-year-old Samantha Smith into writing a letter, an act that will, for a brief moment, make her the most famous child on the planet.
Dear Mr. Andropov, I've been worrying about Russia and the United States getting into a nuclear war. I would like to know why you want to conquer the world, or at least our country. Sincerely, Samantha Smith.
Samantha's letter is addressed to Yuri Andropov, the new leader of the Soviet Union. But he has other things on his mind. Tension between the United States and the Soviet Union is running high, and Andropov is spoiling for a fight. The Soviets have invaded Afghanistan, and they're deploying hundreds of SS-20 nuclear missiles throughout Eastern Europe. You'd think the newly appointed chairman of the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union would have other, more pressing things to do. But lo and behold, 5 months later, Samantha's got mail.
Dear Samantha, I invite you to come to our country. You will find out about our country and see for yourself. In the Soviet Union, everyone is for peace and friendship among peoples. Thank you for your letter. Yuri Andropov.
Overnight, Samantha becomes a media darling, with TV stations clamoring for interviews. Many Americans are suspicious. Is the girl a mere pawn for Soviet propaganda? The Smiths accept Andropov's invitation, but not without some trepidation.
We don't know what to expect. We try to remain open-minded about what additional gestures the Soviet leadership may make through Samantha during this trip.
If Samantha's father is a bit wary, he's not alone. His suspicions are shared by most Americans, including the president, Ronald Reagan, a staunch anti-communist who's convinced the USSR is an evil empire on the way out.
The West won't contain communism. It'll transcend communism. It won't bother to dismiss or denounce it. It will dismiss it as some bizarre chapter in human history whose last pages are even now being written.
In the war on communism, Reagan, not surprisingly, sees himself in the role of a hero, a role he has portrayed many times as a Hollywood actor.
Tough luck, son. I guess we can't all have charm and good looks, too.
He's been a football star, an FBI agent, and in the classic Western Law and Order, a no-nonsense sheriff.
All right, boys, that'll be enough.
All we want is Durango.
You're not going to get it. You wanted law and order in this town. You've got it.
Of all his roles, his favorite by far is that of the cowboy out for justice. When he goes into politics, it's this image he chooses to nurture.
You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance.
Reagan's years as an actor well prepared him for remembering his lines, for stage managing his appearances, for delivering his speeches with just a sort of perfect delivery. that worked really well in this new age of instant-on television.
Reagan believes the Soviet military machine is more powerful than that of the United States. To even things out, he pumps big bucks into national defense. To counter the threat of the Soviet SS-20 missiles, he announces plans to deploy over 500 nuclear missiles across Europe. The message to the Soviets is clear. If there's a war, Reagan plans on winning. This new arms buildup scares the hell out of everyone. In the United States and across Europe, hundreds of thousands fear the geriatric cowboy with his finger on the nuclear trigger. In New York alone, 750,000 people take to the streets. In the face of mass protest, Reagan realizes he'll have to change his tune. He unveils his plan. It's the ultimate spin on the ultimate weapon, a weapon of peace. It's the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI.
I call upon the scientific community in our country, those who gave us nuclear weapons, to turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete.
Reagan imagines a sort of anti-missile shield, an umbrella that protects the United States in case of nuclear attack. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. And sure enough, what does it become known as? Star Wars.
For the Soviet Union, the meaning of the Star Wars was not defenses out there. The meaning of the Star Wars for the Soviet leadership was a possibility of the first strike from space.
Despite the extreme tension, Samantha Smith and her parents take up Andropov's invitation to visit the USSR.
The girl is invited for maybe a double purpose, for our own propaganda directed to our own citizens, to show that we, the Soviet Union, are very open. We want American kids to communicate with our kids. It is also directed at the United States because the hope is that the American people would respond to this gesture of the little girl coming and meeting with the Soviet leaders.
The Soviet propaganda machine has a clear mission. Make certain the girl's visit is a success by showing her a positive image of the USSR.
The kids have lots of questions about America, especially about clothes and music. Sometimes at night, we talk about peace, but it didn't seem really necessary because none of them hate America, and none of them want war.
Samantha's mother knows what's going on.
It's pretty obvious it's propaganda, but we think it's good propaganda. We really believe it would be good PR for both countries if we can work it out.
Samantha never actually gets to meet Yuri Andropov, but she does get to hang out with one of the most famous women on the planet, cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman to have traveled into space. After 2 weeks in the USSR, Samantha Smith heads home with a message for Americans.
Soviet people do not want war. They're a lot like us, and they do not want harm for the world.
Back in the US, Samantha starts spreading the good news. She's a hit on the talk show circuit, but the invitations come to an abrupt end. Samantha's message of peace is overshadowed by a tragedy. September 1st, 1983, Korean Airlines flight KAL-007 is shot down in Soviet airspace. All 269 people on board are killed. 12 hours later, the Soviets officially announced that an unidentified aircraft has invaded their airspace. However, they failed to mention that they are the ones who shot it down.
Примерно 10 минут он находился в зоне наблюдения радиолокационными средствами, после чего наблюдение за ним было потеряно.
In Washington, the propaganda machine is up and running.
I'm coming before you tonight about the Korean airline massacre.
This was a great opportunity to indict the Soviet system, to brand them as a terrorist state, to isolate them before world public opinion.
There was absolutely no justification, either legal or moral, for what the Soviets did. The Soviets still refuse to tell the truth. Indeed, they've not even told their own people that a plane was shot down.
President Reagan goes so far as to play a recording of the Soviet pilot's voice, proof, he says, that KAL-007 was deliberately shot down. But Reagan's not telling the whole story. On the original recording, the Soviet pilot repeatedly asks the KAL pilots to identify themselves. They don't answer. He fires a warning shot, still nothing. So he figures it must be a spy plane. At this point, he shoots the plane down. On the tape the Americans share with the world, these crucial moments of the recording are conveniently missing. The doctored version of the recording gives Reagan what he wants. The destruction of KAL-007 makes the Soviets look like the bad guys.
If the Soviets shoot down a civilian aeroplane, it raises questions about whether they would consider employing nuclear missiles. This has the effect of not only legitimizing President Reagan's offensive against the Soviet Union, but it also, at the same time, emasculates criticism that was actually leveled against Reagan for his arms buildup.
2 months later, with little resistance from pacifists, Americans achieved their objective: missiles in Western Europe. Reagan is on a roll. In 1984, he seeks a second term as president. His campaign slogan, America is back. Reagan wins by a landslide.
Let me just say, well, you know, good habits are hard to break.
A few months later, Samantha Smith and her father are killed in a plane crash. 1,000 people attend the funeral of the little girl who preached peace in the evil empire.
Dear Mrs. Jane Smith.
Among them, a representative of the Soviet embassy in Washington who reads a message of condolence from the Kremlin. The White House sends no one. It's hard to imagine life in Poland in the 70s. The Eastern Bloc country's economy is in ruins, and there are shortages of everything. Maria Sova gets up at 4 in the morning to stand in line. Even in the middle of winter, she stands in the cold for hours.
Standing in line is almost like a second job. After work, we come home, eat quickly, and run back out and go stand in line. Sometimes we don't even bother going home because we see the line has already formed. So we get in line. Doesn't matter what they're selling. We stand in line sometimes until the store closes.
In Poland, life is hard. The price of meat is double what it is in Western Europe, shoes 5 times as much. The waiting list for an apartment, 12 years. The country has been trapped behind the Iron Curtain for more than 3 decades, and the Polish people don't have much hope. But all that is about to change. It's sparked by events in Rome, and some might call it a miracle. October 78, Karol Wojtyla, the Archbishop of Krakow, a Pole no less, is elected Pope.
Carissimi fratelli e sorelle.
Like most of the Polish population, Maria Sova is Catholic.
I couldn't believe it. I ran down screaming, "You'll never guess." We turned on the television. Oh, we were so happy, filled with the hope that things were about to change for us.
Unlike the other communist bloc countries, the Polish national identity is closely linked with the church. The church is a real force that represents an alternate reality to the communist regime.
It's great news for the Polish people. But oddly, John Paul II is hardly known in his own country. The day after he's elected, there's just a tiny article in the papers and no picture. And that's the way the communist media prefer it. Don't mention the church, the other power in Poland. For the majority of Poles, the new pope is a man of mystery.
But the communists know Karol Wojtyła only too well. He had been in the resistance. Under the Nazi occupation, he helped Jews hide from the Gestapo, barely avoiding capture himself. Under the communist regime, he became Bishop of Krakow and fought for the right to build churches. He believes it is the church's duty to help change the system. Now as Pope, this great communicator and former actor is on a crusade against communism.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
He is at ease in front of the crowd. He knows how to address an audience. He knows how to emphasize the important phrases by taking a pause from speaking, creating silence.
During the celebration of his first Mass as Pope, John Paul II does more than quote the Gospel. He goes political.
Aprite I confini degli stati, I sistemi economici come quelli politici. Non abbiate paura.
No doubt John Paul II would like to visit his native Poland on his first papal pilgrimage. However, communist authorities would rather he didn't. It will take 8 months before the visit is authorized. The Pope uses that time and a whole lot of money to upgrade Radio Vatican. When he does speak, he wants to make sure the people of Poland hear every single word. June 1979, the new Pope finally arrives in Poland. Over the next 9 days, 11 million people, 1 out of every 3 Poles, will come to see their spiritual leader. Not surprisingly, the communist government does its utmost to downplay the Pope's impact. National TV cameras avoid showing crowds, and microphones are placed close to the Pope to avoid picking up the applause. Despite the censorship, everyone knows what's going on. Thousands tune into the shortwave broadcast on Radio Vatican. The Pope's words are inspiring. He's not supposed to talk politics in public, but he knows how to get around the rules. His sermons are nothing less than coded messages. And people know how to read between the lines.
Niech stąpi duch Twój I odnowi oblicze ziemi, tej ziemi.
When the Pope said, "Descend your spirit, that he renews this earth," everyone immediately understood what it meant, which was to overthrow communism. To renew this earth meant to change the system.
Maria Sova has a little girl, Marzi. One of the first presents Marzi receives is a slide projector, so that she can see images of the man who is offering hope to Poland. The events that will soon shake up Poland will lead her, later in life, to write her memoirs as graphic novels.
I thought I was the only one to make my mother cry. I'm not. The Pope does too. She loves the slides of John Paul II visiting Poland. There's also a fellow with a mustache named Lech Walesa, who's the head of a union that's rebelling against the authorities.
Pope John Paul II had a profound influence on Lech Walesa's thinking, and as a result, Walesa moves away from issues surrounding the trade union movement to wider issues concerning human liberty and human rights that actually galvanize dissident groups throughout Poland.
The movement spreads like wildfire, taking root in factories all across Poland. Tens of thousands of workers go on strike. They want to be recognized as an independent, self-governing trade union. Eventually, the government yields to the pressure. Solidarity becomes the first free trade union movement behind the Iron Curtain. And with it, the first cracks appear in the foundations of communism. When Walesa signs the new agreement, appropriately, he uses a huge pen bearing an image of who else? Pope John Paul II. Within months, Solidarity has 10 million members in Poland. The Soviets see all this as an open challenge to communist authority, and they're a little scared. Moscow sends a clear message: highly publicized military maneuvers on Poland's borders. That should do it.
By sending tanks to the Polish border, Moscow spreads fear by using the ghost of Budapest and Prague. If you can't solve your problems or put your house in order, an intervention is possible.
On a Sunday morning in December, Marzi wants to watch a children's program on TV.
Before church, my parents always turn on the television. But there's no picture today. My father thinks there's a wire loose. He unplugs the cords, blows on them, and hooks everything back up. Still, all we get is more static. Suddenly, the picture comes back on.
Codzienna praktyka, narastająca agresywność ekstremistów.
General Wojciech Jaruzelski appears and declares Poland is in a state of war.
After threatening military intervention, the Soviets demand that Jaruzelski, their man in Poland, do whatever it takes to take control and re-establish order in Poland. So, he imposes martial law and bans Solidarity. He has thousands of union activists arrested and places Lech Walesa under house arrest. To the soldiers who come to arrest him, Walesa warns, "This is the moment of your defeat. You have just put in the last nails in the coffin of communism."
Niepokój jest uzasadniony.
Pope John Paul is very much aware that the world is watching and listening when he gives his weekly public audience. He denounces the crackdown of martial law in Poland, first in Polish, then in Italian. And if there's any doubt, he confirms what the journalists gathered.
You have my message. You have my message.
In Poland, Solidarity fights back, but they have to operate in absolute secrecy, which is tough. Public demonstrations are met with extreme violence. There is no shortcut on the road to freedom.
своей головой.
1984, a time of doom and gloom in the Soviet Union. Rock band Televisor screams the discontent of the youth, a generation that has nothing in common with the sickly old men in power. They no longer buy into the propaganda they were raised on. There's a new boss at the Kremlin, and that means change. This guy is a radical. He wants to put an end to the propaganda and lies of his predecessors.
Here's a story that seems to reveal the character of the new guy. He's taking part in a nuclear war simulation, and in this completely fictional crisis, he's asked to push the nuclear button. But he freezes. He can't or won't launch the nuclear missiles, even pretend ones. Meet Mikhail Gorbachev. At 54, Gorbachev is the youngest member of the Politburo. He's also the first Soviet leader to have lived through the Second World War as a child. His family survived German occupation and Stalin's reign of terror. Those experiences shaped the man.
Gorbachev, when he comes to power, is so different. Suddenly, there comes a man who can talk freely, who smiles. He steps out of his car and he goes onto the street and he talks to people, he touches people, and that's amazing.
Although Gorbachev firmly believes in communism, he also recognizes that the regime must change in order to survive. To renew his people's faith in the system, he promises something brand new. The state will practice transparency and honesty. Glasnost has arrived. And it begins with the war in Afghanistan. It's been dragging on for 5 years and is a huge drain on the Soviet economy. But most Soviets have been kept in the dark about the army's merciless war on Islamic rebels. "18-year-old Andrei Krukov still believes in socialism. He's off to Afghanistan with dreams of becoming a hero, just like the brave young men depicted in the media.
The newspapers cover acts of courage, selfless assistance and help to the Afghan population. They provided food aid. So that's what you see in the papers.
After 9 months of training, Andrei lands in Afghanistan. The romance of war is quickly replaced by reality. He sees the truth behind the propaganda. A few weeks after his arrival, the young man who had dreamt of becoming a hero writes to his mother.
In 77 days, I'll be halfway through my tour of duty. I can't wait to be back in our motherland once again. It would be great to go walking here with a backpack instead of my army bag. Right back as soon as possible. Goodbye, Andrei.
Just hours after writing the letter, Andrei is killed. According to his headstone, he died a Soviet hero, died in combat doing his military duty. Andrei Krukov is not alone. 10,000 Soviet soldiers have made the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan. The ugly truth of this war starts to seep out.
The veterans start coming home, but they talk about the awful, awful atrocities that are also committed by the Soviet troops. More and more people coming back, they say it's a crime what we're doing there.
Gorbachev knows the propaganda can no longer hide the truth. He begins to speak openly about the war, even calls it an open wound. But Gorbachev will soon learn that there's nothing easy about affecting change in the USSR.
Gorbachev recognized the need and the desire to make changes in the Soviet Union. He wanted to open up Soviet society, to make it more transparent. However, he was up against a huge political and bureaucratic juggernaut that would actually bring his reforms to a screeching halt.
Saturday, April 26, 1986. An accident occurs at reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear plant in Ukraine. A massive explosion releases 10 nuclear bombs worth of radiation. It's the worst nuclear disaster in history, not to mention a catastrophe for Gorbachev's policy of openness. 3 kilometers from ground zero is Pripyat, population 55,000. Life goes on as usual, despite dangerously high levels of radiation in the air. Its effects can be clearly seen on film shot that day.
Authorities wait 36 hours before ordering the evacuation of the town. They say it's a temporary measure. No one mentions a nuclear accident. A radioactive cloud quickly spreads over Europe. Technicians at a nuclear plant in Sweden notice abnormally high levels of radiation. Suspicions immediately focus on the USSR. The news travels quickly around the world, except for the USSR, where the media and government say nothing.
Gorbachev is told about the accident on the day it happens, but officials hide the extent of the damage. So to get the truth, he sends his own team to investigate. And when he gets their report a week later, he's shocked. Oddly, he chooses to keep silent.
There is a kind of tradition when there's a serious accident in the Soviet Union not to reveal any information to the outside world unless it's absolutely necessary.
It takes more than 2 days before Soviet television makes a brief announcement that there has been a mishap at Chernobyl. Still nothing is said about the radiation hazard.
In Kiev, just 150 kilometers from Chernobyl, May Day celebrations are in full swing, as if nothing's happened.
Zoya Gulko is a nuclear physicist at the Kiev Research Center. He knows that the government is keeping the danger a secret from the public. To protect his 8-year-old daughter, Kira, he draws a line down the middle of their apartment and tells her not to cross it, so she stays away from the windows. But his wife, Slava, a teacher, has no choice but to take her pupils to May 1st Workers' Day celebrations. They parade outside, unaware that they are exposing themselves to lethal radiation.
The principal said that I would lose my job if my class didn't go. I had no choice. A mother called to ask me, "Why are you doing this? You know it's dangerous to go out." I said I couldn't refuse. She responded, "One day you'll regret it. Just wait and see."
Все вы знаете, недавно нас постигла беда.
Mikhail Gorbachev finally addresses the people of the Soviet Union, 18 days after the accident. For the first time, the Soviet leader admits there's been a nuclear disaster. He knows that the image of the USSR will never be the same.
Она больно затронула советских людей, взволновала международную общественность.
The Chernobyl disaster is really the start of glasnost proper. Glasnost, essentially, it's been translated as openness or frankness. The key aspect of glasnost is self-criticism. It's the idea that the Soviet Union should look at itself in a critical manner and not simply talk about its successes.
Mikhail Gorbachev and his band Televizor take Gorbachev at his word. Thanks to glasnost, they can express their discontent even more freely.
So the whole idea of control suddenly became unreal. Nobody gave a shit anymore. At the next festival, we sang much harder songs, but none of the controllers said anything, because this time you were not alone.
Glasnost reaches fever pitch in the USSR. Who would have dreamt that a Soviet leader would one day be more popular in America than the Vice President of the United States? But that's exactly what happens when Mr. Gorbachev goes to Washington and decides to go walkabout.
What do you think of Gorbachev? The guy is a PR genius. I mean, jumping out of the car like that, unbelievable.
When Gorbachev arrives in America, he's greeted as a hero by the American public because the message he's projecting is one of hope. And it's a message that the American public have been wanting to hear for a considerable time. President Reagan would have been ill-advised to go against such sentiments.
December 8th, 1987. The Cold War takes a new turn as Ronald Reagan finally changes his tune.
I've often felt that our people should have been better friends long ago.
The hate has turned to love. Gorbachev is in Washington to sign an historic agreement to not just limit nuclear arms, but destroy them.
Gorbachev represents hope for change, and people sense it in the US, but also within his own Soviet empire, even in the demonstrations in Poland, though it may not appear that way at first glance. The situation in Poland hasn't improved since the imposition of martial law by General Jaruzelski. In the summer of 1988, thousands of Polish workers are on strike. Their demands are clear. Solidarity must be legalized again. General Jaruzelski finally agrees to negotiate with Lech Walesa. He has no choice. Mikhail Gorbachev has announced that the USSR will no longer come to the rescue of its communist allies. The stark truth is that he no longer has the means to do so.
Любое вмешательство во внутренние дела, любые попытки ограничить суверенитет государств, как друзей и союзников, так и кого бы то ни было, недопустимы.
Gorbachev's message is nothing short of revolutionary. He's breaking with 40 years of Soviet tradition, 40 years when the USSR had more than a word to say about how its satellite countries were run. A wind of freedom is blowing across Eastern Europe, and Poland is the first to benefit. April 1989, after 2 months of negotiations, the Polish government caves in.
Solidarity, much to everyone's delight, is legalized. Elections are organized, and on June 4th, after Mass, everyone hurries to the polls. Our first vote in 40 years. Solidarity wins a stunning victory. Poland becomes the first Eastern Bloc country to have a non-communist prime minister.
It took Poland 10 years to reach this position, but for the rest of Eastern Europe, events would now rapidly take on a momentum of their own.
That same summer, Hungary begins to tear down the Iron Curtain separating it from Austria. In early November, East Berlin is paralyzed by the biggest demonstration in its history. On November 9th, the most notorious symbol of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall, comes crashing down. Back in Poland, Marzi is glued to the television.
It was as if all the walls of my building fell with it, as if all the apartments had become one. All the doors stood open. We had opened the door to freedom. We were all welcoming it together with arms and hearts opened wide.
The fall of the Berlin Wall has a domino effect in the Soviet satellite countries. Communist power is swept away. In Hungary, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. "40 years of division in Europe are over, but the winds of change are still blowing strong." December 1st, 1989, a scene that would have been unimaginable only a few months earlier. Pope John Paul II greets Gorbachev, the heads of Catholicism and communism together. Once again, hate turns to love. The next day, in the midst of a storm off the coast of Malta, Gorbachev, sitting next to the new president of the United States, George Bush Sr., makes it official. The world is leaving one epoch, the Cold War, and entering a new one. We have buried the Cold War at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. Later, he'll be recognized as the principal architect responsible for ending the Cold War. He is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Gorbachev is on top of the world. But he surely didn't dream of what would happen next. Back home, the emperor has no clothes, and the empire is disintegrating. The Soviet economy is in a shambles, and the citizens of Moscow are in no mood for love.
Propaganda instilled a sense of pride in the achievements of the Soviet Union as a superpower. However, as the Union began to break up, the propaganda increasingly did not match the experiences of citizens in everyday life. As a result, Gorbachev was seen as a weak and ineffectual leader.
At the May Day parade, Gorbachev is heckled by the crowd. He is finally forced to leave the stand. On December 25th, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev is swept out by the wave of reform that he himself has triggered. He has no choice but to step down.
Я прекращаю свою деятельность на посту президента СССР.
The next day, the Soviet Union ceases to exist. After 45 years of tension and countless lives lost in hot proxy wars, America is the last man standing, and therefore, the winner of the Cold War.
Propaganda became the tool of engagement in a war that neither of the superpowers could win in a military sense. The rhetoric of propaganda took the world to the edge of the abyss, but it also ensured that the two superpowers would never engage in a nuclear conflict. When the Berlin Wall was breached, Soviet Cold War propaganda fell silent. In the West, on the other hand, ultimate victory vindicated a long and costly war that was underpinned from start to finish by love, hate, and propaganda.